What happens when a British television veteran with decades of experience goes head-to-head with one of America's most controversial talk show hosts? You're about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations ever caught on live television. Denise Welch, known for her no-nonsense approach and fearless commentary, was invited as a guest on The View to discuss her latest mental health advocacy work. What should have been a straightforward interview quickly spiraled into an all-out war of words, leaving the studio audience gasping and viewers at home reaching for their remotes. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about celebrity feuds on live TV. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of what unfolds next. The morning started like any other at the View Studios in New York. Denise Welch had flown in from Manchester specifically for this interview, excited to share her passion project on mental health awareness with an American audience. She had done her research on the show, knew the format, and felt prepared for what she believed would be a supportive conversation. Little did she know that Joy Behar had other plans entirely. As Denise settled into her chair during the commercial break, she sensed something was off. The usual warm-up banter between hosts felt forced, and Joy kept shuffling through her notes with an intensity that made the other co-hosts visibly uncomfortable. Whoopi Goldberg tried to lighten the mood with a joke about British accents, but even that fell flat in the tense atmosphere. When they returned from commercial, Joy wasted no time launching into her prepared questions, but her tone was already sharper than Denise had expected based on their brief pre-show chat. "So, Denise," Joy began, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you've been quite vocal about mental health issues, but some critics say that celebrities talking about depression and anxiety is just another way to stay relevant. How do you respond to that?" The question caught Denise completely off guard. This wasn't the supportive platform she had been promised when her publicist arranged the appearance. She felt her defenses rise, but maintained her composure. "Well, Joy, I think that's quite a cynical way to look at it," Denise replied, her British accent becoming more pronounced as she tried to stay calm. "When someone like myself shares their struggles with mental health, it's not about staying relevant. It's about removing the stigma and helping people who are suffering in silence realize they're not alone." Joy nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't buying it. "But don't you think there's a difference between genuine advocacy and what some might call performative activism? I mean, you're promoting a book? You're on a publicity tour." The other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah N. tried to jump in with a more supportive question, but Joy held up her hand, clearly not finished. "I'm sorry, but I have to push back on that," Denise said, her voice steady, though her eyes flashed with the first signs of irritation. "I've been talking about mental health long before I had any book to promote. I've been open about my bipolar disorder for over a decade because I believe transparency saves lives." Bipolar disorder, Joy repeated, emphasizing each word. "That's quite convenient, isn't it? These days, everyone seems to have some sort of mental health diagnosis. Whatever happened to just having a bad day?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something was about to go very wrong. Denise's jaw tightened, and for a moment she looked as though she were weighing whether to walk off the set or stay and fight. "Convenient," Denise repeated slowly, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Joy, are you seriously suggesting that my mental health struggles are convenient? That the years of therapy, medication, and genuine fear for my own safety were just a publicity stunt?" Joy realized she had pushed too far, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I'm just saying that in my generation, we didn't run to therapists every time life got tough. We dealt with our problems privately. Your generation also swept everything under the carpet and pretended it didn't exist." Denise shot back, her composure finally beginning to crack. How many people suffered in silence because of that attitude? How many people took their own lives because they were too ashamed to ask for help? The tension in the studio was now palpable. Whoopi tried to step in as the moderator, but both women were locked in their verbal battle, completely focused on each other. "I think what Joy is trying to say," Whoopi began diplomatically, but Denise cut her off. "No, Whoopi. I know exactly what Joy is trying to say, and frankly, it's dangerous. This dismissive attitude toward mental health is exactly why we still have such a crisis in this country and around the world." Joy leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, clearly enjoying that she had gotten under Denise's skin. Crisis might be a strong word. Maybe what we have is a generation that's been coddled into thinking every emotion needs to be analyzed and medicated. That was the moment Denise's famous temper finally erupted. Her face flushed red as she leaned forward, pointing directly at Joy. "Are you out of your mind?" Denise exploded, her voice echoing through the studio with such force that several crew members looked up from their equipment. A generation that's been coddled. "Joy, do you have any idea how ignorant you sound right now?" Joy's eyes widened in shock. In all her years hosting The View, very few guests had ever confronted her so directly. She clearly wasn't prepared for this level of pushback. "Excuse me," Joy stammered, sitting up straighter in her chair. "I think you need to calm down and remember where you are." "Where I am?" Denise laughed bitterly, shaking her head in disbelief. "I'm sitting across from someone who just trivialized the suffering of millions of people on national television. Someone who thinks depression and anxiety are just fashionable trends rather than legitimate medical conditions that destroy lives." The other co-hosts were frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment play out. In the control room, producers were frantically signaling, but no one seemed to know whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation continue. "Now hold on just a minute," Joy said, her own temper beginning to flare. "I never said depression wasn't real. I'm talking about overdiagnosis, the rush to label every difficult emotion as a disorder." "Oh, so now you're a medical expert?" Denise shot back, her British accent cutting through the air like a blade. "Tell me, Joy, what medical school did you attend? What psychiatric training do you have that qualifies you to decide who is and isn't genuinely suffering?" Joy's face was turning red now, clearly unused to being challenged so directly by a guest. "I don't need medical training to have an opinion. This is a talk show. We discuss things. Denise repeated incredulously. "You're not discussing anything. You're spreading dangerous misinformation. You're perpetuating exactly the kind of stigma that keeps people from seeking help." Sarah N. finally found her voice and tried to redirect the conversation. "Maybe we can talk about the positive impact of mental health awareness campaigns," but Joy wasn't ready to let it go. Something about Denise's passionate response had clearly struck a nerve, and she was determined to maintain control of her show. "You know what I think?" Joy said, leaning forward with a condescending smile. "I think you British celebrities come over here and try to lecture us Americans about our problems, when you can't even sort out your own issues back home." The studio gasped audibly. Even Whoopi looked stunned by the personal nature of the attack. Denise sat back for a moment, processing what had just been said. "Did you just," Denise began slowly, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you just make this about nationality? Are you seriously suggesting that mental health is somehow an American versus British issue? I'm suggesting maybe you should focus on your own country's problems before coming here to tell us how backward we are." Joy replied, clearly pleased with what she thought was a winning comeback. Denise stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward from the force. The sudden movement stirred the crew, and security stepped closer to the set, uncertain whether intervention would be needed. "You are absolutely unbelievable," Denise said, looking down at Joy with a mix of anger and pity. "This isn't about countries or nationalism or your petty political games. This is about human suffering, and you're turning it into some kind of twisted entertainment. Joy remained seated, but her defensive posture showed she was feeling the pressure. I'm not turning anything into entertainment. You're the one who came on here promoting your book and getting emotional when someone asks legitimate questions. Legitimate questions? Denise repeated, her voice rising again. You called my mental health condition convenient. You dismissed an entire generation's struggle as being coddled. Nothing about your questions has been legitimate. Whoopi finally stepped in more forcefully, sensing the confrontation was spiraling completely out of control. Ladies, I think we need to take a step back here. The Denise wasn't finished. She had clearly reached her breaking point, and years of advocating for mental health awareness had prepared her for exactly this kind of ignorant pushback. No, Whoopi, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to step back. Not when someone is sitting here spreading the exact kind of toxic attitudes that literally kill people. Joy. Do you know how many people take their own lives because they're ashamed to admit they're struggling? Do you know how many families are destroyed because people are too proud or too scared to get help? Joy shifted uncomfortably, perhaps beginning to realize she had picked a fight with someone far more prepared and passionate than she had expected. Of course, suicide is tragic, Joy said defensively. But that doesn't mean we can't have honest conversations about overmedication and overdiagnosis. Honest conversations. Denise laughed harshly. There's nothing honest about what you're doing. You're hiding behind the guise of discussion while actually promoting harmful stereotypes and outdated thinking. The tension in the room reached a fever pitch. Even the live audience seemed to be holding its breath, unsure whether it was witnessing television history or a complete disaster. Joy stood up as well, clearly unwilling to be literally looked down on any longer. I've been doing this show for years, and I've never had a guest speak to me this way. Maybe that's the problem. Denise fired back immediately. Maybe if more people had the courage to challenge your outdated views, you wouldn't be sitting in an ivory tower making pronouncements about things you clearly don't understand. The accusation landed. Joy's face flushed even redder as she took a step toward Denise, her professional composure completely gone. Ivory tower. Joy snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that made several audience members wince. You don't know anything about me or what I've been through in my life, and you don't know anything about mental health. Denise shot back without hesitation. The difference is, I'm not sitting here pretending to be an expert on your life experiences. While you're doing exactly that with medical conditions you clearly don't understand. The other co-hosts looked like deer caught in headlights. This had gone far beyond a typical heated discussion, and none of them seemed to know how to regain control. Joy pointed an accusatory finger at Denise, her professional mask fully gone. You came on this show with an agenda. And when someone doesn't just nod and agree with everything you say, you throw a tantrum like a child. A tantrum. Denise raised her voice to match Joy's. I'm standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. I'm fighting the exact kind of ignorance that keeps people suffering in silence. If that's a tantrum to you, then I'm proud to be having one. The studio crackled with tension. Camera operators moved in for close-ups, capturing every moment of the unprecedented confrontation. The live audience was completely silent, transfixed by the raw emotion unfolding before them. You know what your problem is? Joy continued, clearly past the point of no return. You think that because you've had struggles, that makes you some sort of spokesperson for everyone with mental health issues. Newsflash: not everyone wants to air their personal business on television. Denise stared at Joy for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but filled with barely contained fury. My problem, Joy, is sitting right across from me. My problem is watching someone with a platform this big use it to spread misinformation and stigma. My problem is listening to someone dismiss the very real pain of millions of people because it doesn't fit into your narrow worldview. Joy crossed her arms defensively. I'm not dismissing anyone's pain. I'm questioning whether turning every human emotion into a medical diagnosis is actually helping anyone. There it is again, Denise said, shaking her head in disgust. You just can't help yourself. You keep minimizing. You keep dismissing. Keep reducing complex medical conditions to nothing more than emotions people should be able to handle on their own. Whoopi made another attempt to restore order, standing up from her chair. I think we need to remember that we're on live television here. But neither woman backed down. They were locked in a battle of wills that had moved far beyond the usual limits of daytime television. Let me tell you something about emotions. Joy, Denise said, her voice dropping to an intensity that was somehow more unsettling than her shouting. When I was at my lowest point, when my bipolar disorder had convinced me my family would be better off without me, those weren't just emotions I needed to toughen up and deal with. That was a medical emergency that required professional intervention. Joy's expression flickered for a brief moment, perhaps realizing she had pushed Denise into deeply personal territory. But Denise continued without pause. By your logic, I should have done what? Pulled myself up by my bootstraps. Stopped being so coddled. Dealt with it privately like your generation supposedly did. I didn't say that. Joy mumbled, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Yes, you did, Denise shot back. That's exactly what you've been saying for the past 10 minutes. You've been suggesting that people like me are just seeking attention, trying to stay relevant. Making excuses for normal human emotions. The confrontation had reached such intensity that even the crew appeared transfixed, momentarily forgetting their professional roles as they watched the unprecedented scene unfold. Joy tried to regain her composure, but she was clearly shaken. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Wrong foot? Denise laughed bitterly. Joy, you accused me of using my mental health struggles for publicity. You dismissed an entire generation as coddled and overly sensitive. You turned a conversation about helping people into a nationalist attack. There's no right foot to get off after that. Sarah N. made a desperate attempt to salvage the segment. Maybe we can find some common ground on the importance of mental health resources, but Joy wasn't ready to concede. Her pride was wounded, and she was determined to have the final word. You know what, Denise? Maybe the real problem is that people like you have turned mental health into such a sacred cow that we can't even have honest discussions about it anymore without being attacked. The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Denise went very still, and for a moment it seemed as though she might walk off the set. Instead, she took a deep breath and delivered what would become the most quoted moment of the entire confrontation. Sacred cow, Denise said quietly, her voice carrying more authority than all her earlier shouting. Joy, mental health isn't a sacred cow. It's a matter of life and death. And if you can't tell the difference between honest discussion and harmful stigmatization, then you have no business having this conversation at all. She reached for her microphone pack and began removing it, clearly preparing to leave. That's right, run away when someone challenges you, Joy called out. Making one last attempt to maintain control, Denise stopped and turned back one final time. And I genuinely hope that someday you understand the damage that ignorance can cause. With that, she walked off the set, leaving Joy standing as the cameras continued to roll and the studio sat in stunned silence. The remaining co-hosts scrambled to fill the dead air, but nothing could undo the impact of what had just happened. This wasn't simply a disagreement between two television personalities. It was a clash between two fundamentally different philosophies about mental health, empathy, and the responsibility that comes with a public platform as the show finally cut to commercial. Viewers across the country were left processing what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a raw, unfiltered moment that exposed the deep divisions surrounding mental health awareness and advocacy. What did you think of this explosive confrontation between Denise Welch and Joy Behar? Was Denise right to walk off, or should she have stayed to continue the debate? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of celebrity clashes and behind-the-scenes drama.